My name is Olivia Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I was the family disappointment. Not because I was lazy, not because I was cruel, but because I was never the child my parents wanted to brag about. If my younger brother Ethan got a B on a test, my mom framed it like he'd won a Nobel Prize. If I graduated with honors, Dad would simply nod and ask if I had found a real job yet. Eventually, I stopped trying to earn their approval. Because no matter what I accomplished, someone else in the family always deserved the spotlight. That Thanksgiving started like every other one. The Carter house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pumpkin pie. My mother insisted on hosting every year because she loved showing everyone how perfect our family was. From the outside, we probably looked like the picture of the American dream. Inside those walls, it was a completely different story. I stood in the kitchen helping my grandmother arrange dinner rolls while my mother criticized everything I did. Not like that, Olivia, she sighed. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how you survived living on your own. I smiled politely. Years ago, I would have defended myself. Now, I knew better. Nothing I said ever changed anything. Across the room, Ethan walked in carrying nothing but his car keys. There's my successful son, Mom said, giving him a hug. He hadn't helped cook. He hadn't brought dessert. He hadn't even arrived on time. Still, he was treated like the guest of honor. Traffic was terrible, he said. Mom laughed. I'm just glad you're here. 5 minutes later, she asked me why I hadn't finished setting the table. That was my place in the family. Invisible. Until there was work to do. Dinner finally began. For a little while, everything stayed peaceful. People talked about football, vacations, and work promotions. Then my aunt asked me the question I dreaded every holiday. So, Olivia, how's business? The table became quiet. I forced a smile. I closed the company earlier this year. Oh, she replied awkwardly. Before anyone could change the subject, Ethan leaned back in his chair with a grin. I told you that business idea wouldn't last. A few people chuckled. I kept eating. Then my mother raised her wine glass. Well, she laughed. At least one of my children turned out successful. Everyone looked toward Ethan. The room filled with laughter. Even my cousins smiled uncomfortably. No one defended me. Not one person. I looked toward Grandpa. He wasn't laughing. He simply watched me with sad eyes, as if he had seen this happen too many times. I quietly placed my fork on the plate. I'm going to head home, I said softly. Mom rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so sensitive. We're just joking. That sentence. I had heard it my entire life. Whenever they insulted me, whenever they embarrassed me, whenever they ignored me, it was always a joke. I stood, thanked Grandma for dinner, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Ethan whisper, "See, she always has to make everything about herself." More laughter. I didn't turn around. Outside, the November air was freezing. I sat in my car, closed the door, and finally let myself cry. Not because of what they had said, but because a small part of me had still hoped. Maybe this year would be different. It never was. As I wiped my eyes and started the engine, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it. For some reason, I answered. Ms. Olivia Carter? A calm voice asked. Yes. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm the attorney for your grandfather, Richard Carter. My heart skipped. Is Grandpa okay? There was a long pause. I'm afraid I have difficult news. Everything around me suddenly felt silent. The world outside my windshield disappeared. Then he said the words that would change my life forever. Your grandfather passed away early this morning. I couldn't breathe. Before I could even process the loss, Mr. Brooks continued. But before he died, he left very specific instructions. He requested that you and only you, be present at my office next Monday. And he made it very clear that no one in your family should know about this meeting. At that moment, I had no idea why my grandfather had trusted me with a secret. I only knew one thing. The family who had laughed at me over Thanksgiving was about to discover that Grandpa had been keeping secrets of his own. I barely slept that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather sitting silently at the Thanksgiving table, watching everyone laugh while I stared at my plate. He had known. For the first time, I realized he hadn't looked sad because I was being mocked. He had looked sad because he already knew he didn't have much time left. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and freezing rain. The address Mr. Brooks had given me led to a quiet law office in downtown Boston. It wasn't flashy, just an old brick building with polished wood floors and framed legal certificates lining the walls. A receptionist greeted me kindly. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Brooks is expecting you." She led me into a private conference room. Standing by the window was a man in his early 60s wearing a navy suit. He turned, offered a warm handshake, and said softly, "I'm very sorry for your loss, Olivia." I thanked him and sat down. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he slid a sealed envelope across the table. "This was left specifically for you." My name was written on the front in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. I felt tears welling in my eyes. "Before you open it," Mr. Brooks said, "there's something you need to know." He folded his hands. "For the last 6 years, your grandfather updated his estate plan several times. Each update reflected new information he learned about your family." I frowned. "What kind of information?" He paused carefully. "I'm not authorized to discuss that today. Your grandfather wanted you to discover the truth in the order he planned." That answer only deepened the mystery. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line made my heart stop. "Olivia, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means you're finally ready to learn why I stayed quiet for so many years." I kept reading. "You always believed I didn't notice how your parents treated you. I noticed everything." My hands began to shake. I saw the birthdays they forgot. I saw the promotions they ignored. I saw how every mistake made by someone else somehow became your fault. A tear landed on the page. For years, I had convinced myself maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I really was too sensitive. But Grandpa had seen it too. The letter continued. "I wanted to protect you sooner, but I needed proof before I acted. People reveal who they truly are when money is involved." I looked up at Mr. Brooks. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a folder and placed a small brass key on the table. "This key belongs to a safety deposit box. It contains documents your grandfather wanted only you to see. When you're ready, I'll take you there." I stared at the key. It looked ordinary, yet somehow it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Before leaving, Mr. Brooks gave me one final warning. "Olivia, whatever you find inside that box, don't tell your family until you've read every page." His voice wasn't dramatic. It was serious, almost protective. As we walked toward the bank across the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that my grandfather had spent years preparing for this moment. And whatever waited inside that safety deposit box was about to explain everything. The bank vault was colder than I expected. The walls were lined with rows of steel boxes, each holding someone else's secrets. Mr. Brooks walked beside me without saying a word. He handed the banker the paperwork, and a moment later, a long metal box was placed on a private table. "This belongs to you now," he said quietly. "Take your time." When we were alone, I slid the lid open. Inside wasn't money. There were neatly labeled folders, a small leather journal, several photographs, and a flash drive. On top sat another envelope. My grandfather's handwriting covered the front. "For Olivia only." I took a deep breath and opened it. If you've made it this far, you're probably wondering why I kept all of this hidden. The answer is simple. I hoped your family would change. They never did. I swallowed hard and continued reading. Everything in this box is arranged in the order you should read it. Don't skip ahead. The first folder was labeled 2019 Financial Records. I opened it. At first, nothing looked unusual. Bank statements, property tax receipts, investment summaries. Then I noticed something strange. Several large withdrawals had been made from Grandpa's accounts. Each one carried notes claiming the money was for his medical care. But I remembered those years. Grandpa had insisted on paying his own bills. He rarely spent anything beyond groceries and books. "Mr. Brooks," I asked, looking up, "who authorized these withdrawals?" He didn't hesitate. "Your father held a limited financial power of attorney." I felt my stomach tighten. Was Grandpa aware? He believed every dollar was being used for his care. I looked back at the documents. The signatures authorizing the withdrawals were real, but the expenses listed underneath didn't match. Luxury SUV payments, beach vacations, private school tuition, thousands of dollars had disappeared. I reached for the next folder. Email, correspondence. Most of the emails were between Grandpa and his financial advisor. Then I found one from nearly 4 years earlier. It wasn't written by Grandpa. It was from my father. "Don't tell Olivia anything. She doesn't need to know about the finances. She'll only create unnecessary drama." Another email followed. This one from Ethan. "Grandpa trusts her too much. If she gets involved, she'll ruin everything." I stared at the screen in disbelief. I hadn't even known there was anything to be involved in. Yet somehow they had already decided I couldn't be trusted. Mr. Brooks remained silent. He had probably watched countless families fall apart over inheritances. Still, even he looked disappointed. Next, I opened the leather journal. Unlike the financial records, this wasn't evidence. It was personal. Every page was written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. The entries stretched back almost 7 years. One sentence caught my attention immediately. "Olivia visited today. She brought groceries even though she could barely afford them herself." A few pages later, "Ethan stopped by only long enough to ask about money." Another, "My son says Olivia is irresponsible. Funny. She's the only one who never asks me for anything." Tears blurred my vision. Grandpa had been watching all along. He had noticed every quiet act of kindness, every ignored birthday, every holiday where I was treated like an outsider. Then I reached the final page. Unlike the others, it was written only weeks before he died. "Today, I made my final decision. No one knows, not even Olivia. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but it should come honestly. When the time is right, she'll understand why." I gently closed the journal. There was only one item left: the flash drive. Mr. Brooks looked at it for a long moment. "That's the only thing your grandfather asked me not to watch. He wanted its contents to be seen by you first." I held the tiny drive in my hand. "So, whatever's on this changes everything." Mr. Brooks nodded. "I believe it does." As we left the bank, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Mom, family dinner this Sunday. Don't be late this time. No mention of Grandpa. No mention of his funeral. No mention of asking how I was doing. Just another family gathering." I looked at the message, then slipped the flash drive into my pocket. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that house empty-handed. I was carrying the truth. I just didn't know how explosive that truth was about to become. I didn't go straight home after leaving the bank. Instead, I drove to my apartment, locked the door, made a cup of coffee I never touched, and sat in front of my laptop. The flash drive rested on my desk. It looked ordinary. Just a small black USB drive. Yet somehow I knew my grandfather had trusted it with the truth he could never say out loud. I plugged it into my computer. Only one file appeared. For Olivia.mp4. I clicked play. The screen flickered before Grandpa appeared. He was sitting in his favorite leather chair, wearing the same navy cardigan he always wore on cold mornings. He smiled gently. "Hello, sweetheart." The sound of his voice hit me harder than I expected. Tears instantly filled my eyes. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. I wish I had more time." He paused, taking a slow breath. But some truths can only be told after certain people lose the power to hide them. He reached beside him and held up a thick folder. "Everything inside this folder has already been copied by my attorney. So even if someone tries to destroy the originals, the evidence will survive." My heart started racing. "For years," Grandpa continued, "I believed my son was helping me manage my finances. I trusted him because he was family. That trust was misplaced." He looked directly into the camera. "I discovered money disappearing from my accounts. At first I thought I had forgotten writing the checks. But then I started asking questions." The video cut briefly to scanned bank statements, highlighted withdrawals, wire transfers, credit card payments. Every transaction pointed to one conclusion. Someone had been treating Grandpa's savings like a personal bank account. The video returned to Grandpa. "When I confronted your father, he blamed accounting mistakes. When I questioned Ethan, he claimed he knew nothing. But they didn't know I had already hired a forensic accountant." I stared at the screen in shock. A forensic accountant? Grandpa had secretly investigated his own family. He continued. "They believed my age made me easy to fool. They were wrong." Grandpa sighed deeply. "I wanted to report everything immediately. But there was one reason I waited. You." I leaned closer. "I knew if I accused them while I was alive, they would blame you. They've done it your entire life. I couldn't allow that." My chest tightened. Even now, he had been protecting me. The screen faded to another recording. This time, it showed hidden security camera footage from Grandpa's study. There was no audio, only video. Dad entered the room alone. He opened Grandpa's desk drawer. He removed a folder. He photographed several pages with his phone. Then he quietly placed everything back exactly where it had been. The timestamp showed it happened late at night while Grandpa was in the hospital. Another clip followed. Ethan entered the same room a week later. He searched through file cabinets before leaving with an envelope tucked inside his jacket. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't suspicion. It was proof. The final scene returned to Grandpa. "If you're wondering why I rewrote my will, this is why. I refuse to reward dishonesty. I refuse to punish kindness." He smiled sadly. "Olivia, if there's one regret I carry, it's that I didn't stand up for you sooner. You deserved better parents. You deserved a better brother. But I hope this gives you something they never could. Peace." The video ended. The room was silent. I sat frozen, staring at the blank screen. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Sunday at Mom's. Don't make everything awkward like you always do." I actually laughed. For years, those messages had made me feel small. Now, they felt pathetic. Because Ethan had no idea. The sister he spent years humiliating was now the only person who knew the truth that could destroy the image he'd spent his entire life protecting. And in just 3 days, we would all be sitting at the same dinner table again. Sunday evening arrived faster than I expected. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I sat in my car for a full minute, staring at the house where I had spent most of my life trying to earn love that was never freely given. For years, walking through that front door filled me with anxiety. This time, I felt something different. Calm. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I finally understood the truth. Their opinions no longer had the power to define me. I stepped inside. The familiar smell of roast chicken and garlic filled the house. My mother looked up from the kitchen. "There you are," she said. "For once, you're actually on time." Not, "I'm glad you came." Not, "How are you holding up after Grandpa's passing?" Just another criticism. "I hit every green light," I replied with a polite smile. She rolled her eyes. "You always have an excuse." The living room was already full. My father sat in his favorite recliner watching football. Ethan was laughing with his wife, Jessica. My Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark had also arrived. The television was loud. Everyone acted as if life were completely normal. No one mentioned Grandpa. No one seemed interested in talking about the funeral. It was almost as if the man who had held this family together had simply disappeared. "Olivia," Aunt Linda said warmly. "How have you been?" Before I could answer, Ethan interrupted. "Oh, she's fine. She's probably looking for another business idea to lose money on." A few uncomfortable laughs spread across the room. I noticed Jessica glance down at the floor. Even she seemed embarrassed. Normally, I would have stayed quiet. This time, I simply smiled. "Maybe," I said. The lack of a reaction caught Ethan off guard. He frowned, clearly expecting an argument. Dinner began 20 minutes later. Halfway through the meal, my father raised his glass. "I think your grandfather would be proud to see the family together." I nearly laughed. Together? The same family that had ignored him while he was alive? The same family he had secretly investigated? I kept my thoughts to myself. Then Mom looked directly at me. "So, have you heard anything from the lawyer?" The room suddenly became quiet. I set my fork down. "A little." "What did he say?" Dad asked too quickly. I noticed Ethan watching me carefully, almost nervously. "He mostly explained the funeral arrangements," I answered calmly. That wasn't a complete lie. Mr. Brooks had discussed the funeral. Just not only the funeral. Dad visibly relaxed. "So nothing important?" "Not yet." Ethan smiled. "Good. One word. Just one." But it confirmed something I hadn't wanted to believe. He was worried. He knew there was something worth hiding. As dinner continued, I watched instead of speaking. Dad kept checking his phone. Mom complained about rising grocery prices despite wearing a brand new designer bracelet. Ethan casually mentioned putting a deposit on a lake house. A lake house. I remembered the financial records, luxury purchases, missing money. Suddenly, none of it seemed like a coincidence anymore. After dessert, everyone moved into the living room. As people chatted, my grandmother quietly walked over and sat beside me. She gently squeezed my hand. "I miss him," she whispered. "So do I." She looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned closer. "The last few months? Your grandfather kept saying he finally had everything he needed." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" He never explained. He only smiled and said, "The truth always catches up with people." A chill ran down my spine. Grandpa had known exactly what he was doing. Before I could ask another question, Dad called from across the room. "Olivia." I turned toward him. "If the attorney contacts you again, let me know immediately." His tone sounded casual, but his eyes weren't. They were searching my face, trying to read me, trying to figure out what I knew. I smiled politely. Of course. It was the first promise I'd ever made to my father that I already knew I wasn't going to keep. As I drove home that night, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Daniel Brooks." I answered immediately. "Olivia," he said. "The will has officially been scheduled for next Friday." I took a slow breath. "Will everyone be there?" "Yes." He paused. And I strongly suggest you prepare yourself. For what? His voice became unusually serious. Your grandfather left more than an inheritance. He left instructions. And once those instructions are read, your family will never be the same again. Friday morning arrived cold and overcast, the kind of gray New England morning that made the city feel quieter than usual. I parked outside Brooks and Whitmore law offices and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the entrance. This was it. Whatever Grandpa had planned was about to unfold. When I entered the conference room, everyone was already there. My parents sat together at one end of the long mahogany table. Ethan leaned back confidently, scrolling through his phone. His wife, Jessica, sat beside him, looking noticeably uncomfortable. Grandma quietly held a tissue in her hands. Mr. Brooks entered carrying 3 thick binders and a sealed envelope. He greeted everyone professionally before taking his seat. Thank you all for coming. As you know, Richard Carter's last will and testament was finalized 8 months before his passing. Dad nodded impatiently. Let's get on with it. Mr. Brooks looked at him for a long moment before opening the first binder. As requested by Mr. Carter, I will begin with several personal statements. He unfolded a handwritten page. To my family. If you are hearing these words, then I am no longer here to speak for myself. The room fell silent. I ask that no one interrupt until my attorney has finished reading every instruction. Mr. Brooks looked up. My client was very clear about that. Then he continued. Grandpa thanked lifelong friends. He left donations to 2 veterans' charities and the local public library. He created college funds for his great-grandchildren. Everyone listened politely. Ethan checked his watch twice. He clearly expected the important part to come later. Eventually, Mr. Brooks reached another envelope. This section is addressed specifically to my children. Dad straightened in his chair. Mom folded her hands. Family is built on trust, Mr. Brooks read. When trust is broken, love alone cannot repair the damage. Dad frowned. What does that mean? Mr. Brooks calmly continued. During my final years, I discovered actions that deeply disappointed me. Because of those actions, I made decisions that some of you will not understand today. The room grew noticeably tense. Ethan stopped looking at his phone. For the first time that morning, he looked nervous. Mr. Brooks closed the page. The financial distribution will be discussed shortly. Before anyone could relax, he reached for the sealed envelope. There is one final instruction before we continue. He broke the seal. Mr. Carter requested that this video be shown to everyone present. Dad immediately interrupted. A video? Yes? It's part of the legally filed estate instructions. Mr. Brooks connected a flash drive to the large television mounted on the conference room wall. The screen lit up. There was Grandpa, sitting in his familiar leather chair, exactly as I had seen him days earlier. Only this time, everyone else was seeing him too. He smiled sadly. If you're watching this together, then my attorney has followed my instructions. He paused. I imagine some of you believe today is about money. It isn't. It's about truth. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Ethan crossed his arms. Grandpa continued. For years, I watched this family slowly become divided by greed. I also watched one person continue choosing kindness, even when kindness was never returned. I felt every eye in the room slowly turn toward me. Grandpa wasn't finished. But before I explain my decisions, I believe everyone deserves to see the evidence for themselves. The video faded to black. Mr. Brooks stood. As instructed by Mr. Carter, we will take a 10-minute recess. No inheritance distributions will be announced until everyone has reviewed the evidence prepared for today's meeting. He opened one of the binders. Inside were neatly organized financial records, emails, and photographs. Dad's face instantly lost its color. Ethan stared at the first page without blinking. No one said a word. Because for the first time, they realized Grandpa hadn't made accusations. He had built a case. No one moved. The conference room was so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Mr. Brooks placed a binder in front of each family member. "Please open to the first tab," he said calmly. Dad hesitated. Ethan didn't. He flipped it open with an irritated sigh. "What is all this?" he asked. "Evidence," Mr. Brooks replied. The documents were assembled over several years at Mr. Carter's request. The first page contained a timeline. Every major withdrawal from Grandpa's accounts, every property transfer, every credit card payment. Each transaction was matched with receipts and bank records. Dad's hands began to tremble. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't," Mr. Brooks answered. "The records were independently verified by a forensic accounting firm." Mom looked from Dad to the documents. "What is he talking about?" Dad didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the table. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. Mr. Brooks continued. "Over a 5-year period, more than $1.4 million was withdrawn from Mr. Carter's accounts for expenses that never existed." Gasps filled the room. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Grandma quietly began to cry. Ethan slammed the binder shut. "That's impossible." Mr. Brooks slid another folder across the table. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain these." Inside were copies of luxury car payments, vacation bookings, credit card statements. The names attached to the purchases were unmistakable. Dad, Ethan, even a few charges in Mom's name. Mom's face turned pale. I didn't know where the money came from." Dad finally looked up. "It wasn't stealing. I was going to pay him back." Mr. Brooks remained expressionless. "There is no evidence that any repayment was ever attempted." Silence. Heavy, painful silence. Then Mr. Brooks picked up a small remote. "There is one final recording." The television came back to life. Grandpa appeared once again. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. But his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, then you've already seen the financial records. I know some of you will try to explain them. So let me save everyone the trouble. I gave you opportunities to tell me the truth. You chose lies." He looked directly into the camera. "My greatest disappointment wasn't losing money. It was realizing that my own family valued my bank account more than my trust." Then his expression softened. "Olivia, I hope you're not angry. I know you never wanted any of this. I only ask one thing. Don't become bitter because of what they did. Build the life you deserve." The screen faded to black. No one spoke. Not even Ethan. The confident smile he always wore was gone. Dad finally whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. It was the first apology I'd ever heard from him. But it came only after the truth could no longer be hidden. It wasn't remorse. It was fear. Mr. Brooks closed the final binder. "There is only one matter remaining. The distribution of Mr. Carter's estate." Everyone slowly turned toward him. He opened the last sealed document. My client left very specific instructions regarding who would inherit his estate. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. Then he spoke the sentence that changed everything. "Richard Carter's primary beneficiary is..." He paused. "Olivia Carter." The room exploded. "What?" Ethan shouted, jumping to his feet. "That's impossible," Dad yelled. Mom burst into tears. Grandma simply closed her eyes as though she had expected this all along. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, stunned. Because in that moment, I realized something. Grandpa hadn't given me his fortune to make me rich. He had given it to the one person he believed would protect his legacy. and my family had just learned that everything they thought was guaranteed was never theirs at all. For several seconds, no one spoke. The silence after Mr. Brooks announced my name felt almost unreal. Then Ethan slammed both hands on the conference table. "This is fraud!" His voice echoed through the room. "There is no way Grandpa left everything to Olivia." Dad stood up so quickly that his chair tipped over. "I want another attorney," he demanded. "This will has been manipulated." Mr. Brooks remained perfectly calm. "You are free to retain your own legal counsel. But I assure you, this will has been reviewed, witnessed, notarized, and filed in accordance with state law." Mom wiped tears from her face. "There has to be some mistake. He loved all of us." Mr. Brooks nodded. "I believe he did. But loving someone and trusting someone are not always the same thing." The room fell silent again. Ethan pointed directly at me. "You knew about this." I slowly shook my head. "No." "You're lying." "If I knew, why would I spend years believing I was getting nothing?" He had no answer. Instead, he looked at Mr. Brooks. "What exactly did Grandpa leave her?" The attorney opened the final folder. "Mr. Richard Carter's estate includes his primary residence, investment accounts, retirement portfolio, and several commercial properties." He paused. "The estimated total value is approximately $6.8 million. No one breathed. Even I was stunned. I had known Grandpa was comfortable financially. I had never imagined he had built an estate of that size. Mr. Brooks continued reading. "There are also specific conditions." Dad frowned. "What conditions?" "The beneficiaries who were found to have violated Mr. Carter's trust will receive a symbolic inheritance of $1 each." Ethan laughed bitterly. $1? This is insane. "It was Mr. Carter's decision," Mr. Brooks replied. "He wanted the record to show that no one had been forgotten. They had simply lost his trust." Mom began sobbing. "I never wanted any of this." Grandma quietly reached over and held her hand. No one else moved. Dad turned toward me. "Olivia." His voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "We're still family." For years, I had dreamed of hearing kindness in his voice. Now it finally came, but only after millions of dollars were involved. I looked him in the eyes. "I was family when you laughed at me. I was family when you ignored my birthdays. I was family when you told everyone I was a failure." He lowered his head. "I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply telling the truth." Mr. Brooks cleared his throat. "There is one final instruction." He handed me a sealed envelope. This was to be opened only after the estate distribution. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Olivia, forgiveness is your choice. Reconciliation is not your obligation. Never mistake guilt for love. The people who truly value you will still be there when the money is gone." I folded the note carefully. Grandpa understood them better than anyone. As everyone slowly gathered their belongings, Ethan stopped beside me. His face was red with anger. "This isn't over. We're contesting everything," Mr. Brooks answered before I could. "You certainly have that right. However, you should know that Mr. Carter anticipated a legal challenge." He opened another folder. There are over 300 pages of supporting evidence, sworn witness statements, medical evaluations confirming his mental competence, and recorded explanations for every amendment to his estate plan. Ethan's confidence disappeared. For the first time in his life, he realized there was no shortcut, no manipulation, no one left to blame. As I walked toward the door, Grandma called my name. I turned around. She smiled through her tears. "Your grandfather would be proud of the woman you've become." Those words meant more to me than any inheritance ever could. Outside, the cold wind brushed across my face. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. But I had no idea that my family's desperation was only beginning. Within 48 hours, they would start fighting each other, and the secrets they had hidden from one another for years would begin to unravel. The first phone call came the next morning. Mom. I watched her name flash across my screen until it went to voicemail. Then Dad called. Then Ethan. By noon, I had 12 missed calls and 6 text messages. For years, they could go weeks without asking how I was doing. Now they couldn't stop trying to reach me. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted revenge, because, for the first time, I wanted peace. Late that afternoon, Mr. Brooks called. Olivia, he said, I thought you should know your brother officially filed a notice to contest the will. I sighed. I expected that. He won't get very far. Why? Because your grandfather anticipated every argument his family might make. He documented everything. I thanked him and ended the call. About an hour later, my grandmother called. Her voice was shaking. Can you come over? Is everything okay? No. It's your parents. They're fighting. I hesitated for a moment before driving to the house. The front door was open. Before I even stepped inside, I heard shouting. This is your fault, Ethan yelled. You handled Grandpa's money, Dad shouted back. I only spent what you told me I could. Mom was crying in the kitchen. Aunt Linda sat beside her, trying to calm her down. The perfect Carter family had finally fallen apart. No one noticed me standing in the hallway. Dad slammed a folder onto the dining table. If you hadn't bought that lake house, none of this would have happened. Ethan fired back. If you hadn't been taking money for years, Grandpa would have never investigated us. The room fell silent. It was the first honest sentence either of them had spoken. They weren't denying it anymore. They were blaming each other. Grandma looked at me and quietly whispered, Money reveals character. I nodded. No, I replied softly. It reveals the character that was already there. Everyone turned toward me. Dad looked exhausted. Olivia, I know we've made mistakes. Mistakes? I asked calmly. You spent years making me feel like I didn't belong. You laughed when I failed. You ignored me when I succeeded. You only remember I'm your daughter because Grandpa left me something you wanted. No one argued, because no one could. Mom stood up and walked toward me. She was crying harder than I'd ever seen. I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I should have stopped comparing you to Ethan. I should have been your mother before I was anyone else's. For a moment, I saw genuine regret in her eyes, and that made this harder, because real apologies don't erase years of pain. I gently took her hand. I forgive you. She looked relieved. Then I continued. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. Her smile disappeared. I need distance. I need a chance to build a life where I don't wake up wondering whether I'm enough. Tears rolled down her face. She nodded. I understand. Dad looked at me. What happens now? I answered honestly. I move forward. Whether you come with me depends on the choices you make. Not today, but over time. No one spoke. As I walked toward the front door, Grandma hugged me tightly. She whispered the same words Grandpa had once told her. The strongest people don't win by destroying others. They win by refusing to become like them. I smiled through my tears. For years, I believed I had lost my family. Standing there, I finally realized something. I had never truly had the family I deserved. And maybe that meant I was finally free to create one of my own. As I drove away from the Carter house that evening, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place inside those walls. Now, I was driving toward a future where I no longer needed anyone's permission to belong. But there was still one final chapter left to write. Grandpa had entrusted me with more than an inheritance. He had entrusted me with his legacy, and I intended to honor it. 3 months passed. The headlines never came. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, no last-minute twist, just the quiet reality of consequences. Ethan's legal challenge was dismissed after the court reviewed Grandpa's meticulously documented estate plan. Every amendment, every witness statement, every medical evaluation confirming Grandpa's mental competence supported the will. For the first time in his life, Ethan couldn't talk his way out of the truth. Dad accepted a settlement with the bank to repay a portion of the money that had been improperly taken. It would take years, but he finally accepted responsibility. Mom started attending grief counseling. Grandma told me she cried every week, not just because she missed Grandpa, but because she wished our family had listened to him while he was still alive. As for me, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a luxury car. I didn't post photos online. Instead, I honored Grandpa the way I knew he would have wanted. Using part of the inheritance, I created the Richard Carter Family Scholarship, a program that helped first-generation college students whose families couldn't afford tuition. Grandpa had always believed that education changed lives. Now his kindness would continue long after he was gone. I also restored his favorite public library, replacing old furniture, updating the children's reading room, and donating hundreds of new books. The librarian cried when I told her why. "He always said this place gave him hope," she whispered. "It still will." One autumn afternoon, I visited Grandpa's grave with a small bouquet of white lilies. The cemetery was peaceful. Golden leaves drifted through the air as I knelt beside the headstone. "I did what I could," I said softly. "I hope I made you proud." A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For the first time since losing him, I smiled without forcing it. Weeks later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Mom. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask me to come home. She simply wrote, "I spent years trying to make one child shine by dimming another. I finally understand how much that cost us. Whether or not you ever trust me again, I want you to know I'm trying to become the mother you deserved." I folded the letter and placed it inside Grandpa's journal. Some wounds never disappear, but they can stop controlling your future. A year later, our family looked very different. Not perfect, not completely healed, but honest. Grandma and I had Sunday lunch together every month. Mom and I spoke occasionally, slowly rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. Dad respected the boundaries I had set. Ethan and I rarely spoke. Some relationships simply couldn't be repaired, and that was okay. One evening, as the sun set outside my apartment window, I opened Grandpa's journal one last time. Inside the back cover, tucked into a small pocket I had somehow missed before, was a single handwritten note. It read, "Real wealth isn't measured by what you leave your family. It's measured by the values you leave behind." I held the note for a long time. Then I smiled, because I finally understood. Grandpa's greatest gift had never been the money. It was the courage to stop begging for love from people who refused to give it. He taught me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, honesty, and the people who choose to stand beside you when there's nothing to gain. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this. Never measure your worth by the opinions of people who only value you when you have something they want. Sometimes, walking away isn't losing your family. Sometimes, it's the first step toward finding the life you were always meant to live.